Excellent. Well, hi, everyone. Welcome this afternoon, and thanks for joining us for today's session guidelines on advisor equity. I'm very excited to introduce Marc Meyer, many of whom you all already know. Marc is the chair of SkyDeck's Advisor Council. He's been the chair for several years and sets a very high bar for what it means to be a really great advisor. So that's why he was invited. He is also in charge of the Advisor Level Up series, which he runs here at SkyDeck, and hosts a number of learning workshops and events catered toward our advisor and mentor network. So we just had one, I think, 2 weeks ago on angel investing, which was very well attended. This topic today around advisor equity is something that Marc, myself and a lot of SkyDeck leaders get a lot of questions around from founders asking, how should I be thinking about advisor equity? We also get the same question from advisors and mentors. So we figured it was high time to be hosting this workshop. And so please, without further ado, help me in welcoming Marc Meyer.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Can you see my screen? Maybe pin me somewhere so you can see me as well while I'm talking. Obviously this is so well attended. It's amazing. We just have to hit people in their pocketbooks and they come. So that's great. So I've also been a professional advisor and CEO coach for a number of years, and so I've thought about compensation a lot. But when Sybil suggested this a few months ago, and I started to consult people and ran a survey, started to think about it in a more methodical way, realized, I haven't been that clear in my own thinking about this. So I'm hoping to share some of these learnings. Congratulations to everyone who's come through demo day. We're at the end of the key advisor period during the cohort. So this is a great time to start to talk about how to engage and continue with founders and with advisors. So we have a lot of advisors here, which is great, because maybe I'm going to be a little tough on the advisors. So if the founders don't all hear it, it's not the worst thing. ChatGPT says we have a multitude of mentors, a gathering of gurus, and a sufficiency of sages. So let me dive right in. To begin with, I want to once again re-emphasize that during this whole cohort period, all of the advisors, everything that they've been doing for the founders is done without any compensation or equity throughout the cohort period. That's something that a lot of founders, even though we keep saying it, they don't seem to get it, because we're doing such a lot for them. They figure we must have some participation in the fund. We must have some equity. That's not the case. Having said that, if we want to continue on, and I'm going to use the we, like both founders and advisors here, but if we want to continue on to collaborate, there's no obligation that happens. But if that is desired, as investors, advisors, board members, maybe fractional hires, all of the multitude of things that advisors have said that they do for founders, then we're going to have to figure out how folks are going to get compensated. One thing I want to emphasize here and bring to the fore is that with the advisors that have worked with you already, founders, these are time tested. What you see is what you get. They're going to do the same thing they did, right? So one thing that I think we need to keep in mind is the key advisors have been helping the founders since the pizza was just a ball of dough. And so now that the pizza is made and they helped you make it, don't make them pay full price for a slice. What does that mean? If an advisor wants to invest, give them a good discount, or if you want to keep your valuation up, give them additional advisor shares to protect your valuation. Pay your SkyDeck advisors a little better than you would ones that come in later. Don't penalize them for the free help that they've already given you. So let's start this compensation conversation by looking at some real data. Everything else is opinions, and you can discount it, but the data is really interesting. We'll start with looking at the market, as told to us by Carta just recently in their equity compensation addendum for advisors. I don't know how many people have gotten a chance to see that, but it's really interesting. They've got tens of thousands here, probably 50,000 different contracts with advisors. They've been looking at tracking this for years. And the median compensation for pre-seed, as you can see here, is about 0.25%. For seed is about 0.1%. For Series A, and we're not really going to talk about it, is about 1/14%. So, and that's not per year. That's for the whole engagement, which might be 2 years. It's not really specified. Takeaway, it says only 10% of pre-seed advisors get 1% equity, but really interestingly, only 0.5% of seed stage advisors get 1% equity. Again, the median is about 0.25. So I ran our own survey with some of my sources and together with SkyDeck. This was a lot of fun. We surveyed a lot of folks. We got responses from about 60 advisors and founders. 92% of those were pre-Series A. 2/3 of those were below $5 to $10 million valuation here. And the time commitment for about 2/3 of those was less than an hour a week, an hour or less. And here is, we asked folks what their sense of low equity and low and high equity, both founders and advisors, low equity, high equity, low cash, high cash. And this is what we got. For advisors, the low equity is about 0.33%. Now remember, Carta is saying 0.1%. So we're already quite a bit higher in our expectations. Advisor high equity came out 2%. Somebody wanted 10%, but it all depends, because exactly what we're doing for them is not specified here in these numbers. Founder high equity is about 1% median. So that shows that there's an overlap below about 1%. What you can do is look at the advisors' low equity, what they're willing to take, and what the founders are willing to pay, and that overlap is the area where we can negotiate. If you look at cash, the low cash for advisors was about $1,000 a month. The high was about $4,000 a month. Founders' sort of median willingness to pay was about $2,000 a month. So the overlap is at $1,000 to $2,000 a month. I also want to show you the sort of low equity and low cash where the founders are starting out in their willingness to pay. And that's about 0.1% for equity, or about $600 a month for cash. So that's relatively low, but it's also, that equity is also quite close to Carta. So why is it that we come in higher in our expectations of our equity versus what Carta would say? Not clear. One of the reasons might be that we have pre-existing relationships with these founders. We've helped them before, and so we have slightly higher expectations of what we get out of it. I'm going to, in my Substack, artofthestart.substack.com, that you can subscribe to for free, I'm going to include all of this data and go deeper into it. And so anything that goes by too quickly, you can ask questions later. You'll have access to this presentation, and you can read the article, which will go much deeper into some of these things. Here is the full picture for advisors and founders, their low, high equity and low, high cash expectation. If you want to use this graph, you can probably find areas that are ripe for exploitation with regard to where we can negotiate. So now I'm going to leave the realm of data behind, and I'm going to give you some guidelines, and really what those are going to be some axes, axes along which to think about how to think about compensation. And in order to think about them, I think about them separately, and I'm going to discuss them separately, and I might express them as all A or all B, say all equity or all cash or all short-term value or all long-term value. But the reality is these axes are not independent. And so it's somewhat complicated, and they affect one another. And so your results will be a blend of those things. Nevertheless, I found it quite useful, and I think it's useful to be able to think about them separately and then be able to blend them when you are in these negotiations or when you're deciding what to do. The first thing that I think we need to do as advisors is to ask ourselves, really, what are we trying to get out of this process of advising? So it starts with being honest with ourselves, I think. um, and really thinking this through. So are we trying to buy a lottery ticket or are we trying to pay our mortgage? Both are quite reasonable, but a lottery ticket is really trying to get equity on something that might go to the moon and get an asymmetrical upside. So go for a big payoff. And here the realization is that if I have a dollar that I'm going to spend for a lottery ticket, right? There is a dollar lottery ticket available, and I think that that's a good deal. It makes very little sense for me to buy the lottery ticket and then give back half the lottery ticket to get 50 cents. If I'm going to take a risk on something, because what I really care is about the big upside, I don't really care about the 50 cents, then I should just be thinking like, that's what I want to do, right? And here I'm talking about the issue of mixing equity and cash, right? So it makes sense that if what I'm looking for as a payoff for this relationship as an advisor is to participate in something that might have a really big upside, then I shouldn't be taking cash. I should be taking equity. And what's more is I need to believe in this opportunity. I need to be passionate about the opportunity because I'm going to be devoting a significant amount of time. And I think it's got to have a possibility to go to the moon. Otherwise, I get zero, right? Conversely, if I think about this as a way of paying off my bills, paying my mortgage, then it's got to be a business. It's got to be cash based. It's got to be repeatable because I can't just have one client because that's not going to pay off my mortgage in any significant way. I've got to have a reasonable cost of acquisition. And, I think for myself, when I came to SkyDeck, for a lot of advisors, we think of mentoring and becoming key advisors to these companies, to these startups, as being a way of filtering for later engagement. So it's like our funnel, but that makes no sense. Where that can't be the reason we're doing it because the cost of acquisition is huge. You can only key advise one or two companies. It takes months, and then maybe you'll participate. So it's not really, we can't really view it as a repeatable business. And if that's the case, belief is secondary and counterproductive because if I'm a professional advisor and I'm charging money because I need to pay my mortgage, I need to advise companies that maybe I don't believe in or I stop believing in, not totally, but not like I'm going to take an outsized gamble on them. So we have to ask ourselves why we're advising. And the last one is, are we doing it for profit of any sort? Or are we doing it to give back and taking part in something, participating in something? And a lot of advisors we asked in the survey, why are you doing it? A lot of us said we want to give back, we want to take part in something, we want to interact with these great new companies. People have helped us, we want to help them. So when we professionalize that, we've got to ask ourselves, how much of that do we expect to be paid back? And these are questions to ask ourselves. I'm not going to, just to be clear with ourselves where we're starting. So now I want to talk about what kind of roles are appropriate for advisors. So I think, here's the way I think about it. Advisors are a really expensive resource, right? And if I need to have advisors should be should be in roles where it's most useful to have, most affordable to have advisors in roles where they're leveraging their experience, their expertise, their social proof that they provide, their network, to use a very few hours that can be paid reasonably well, but only a very few hours to do something that's cost effective. So having an advisor provide fish for you is very expensive. Having an advisor teach us to fish is really the sweet spot for advisors. So I think in being an advisor and using an advisor, you should be thinking about something where that work can be done in 1 to 2 hours a week. Now, there are many different kinds of advisors, and this might not hold true, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. The other thing I want to say about roles is that I think founders should look for advisors with broad experience. And the reason for that, and I think advisors should bring broad experience to the founders. And the reason for that is that founders think that they know what they need, but very often what they really need is something else. So having somebody who has some extensive experience is very useful. Don't just look for point. So now the question of cash and equity. So I wanted to find an image here of a marathoner and a sprinter, and they're not. This isn't quite. That doesn't quite do it. But I really think about the sprinter as like somebody who provides short-term value, which is defined and fixed. And those things I would suggest to you are best paid, if possible, with dollars. Think of if I sell you raw material for $5 that you can turn into $7 tomorrow, you don't want to pay me with equity. You want to pay me with cash and you'll make it back tomorrow. Conversely, the marathoner is contributions that have a long-term value and are generally perceived over long period. And there, equity aligns the founder and the advisor. The other side of that is you do have to consider and balance the advisor's needs. Again, maybe I'm a long-term advisor where my impact is going to be in the future, and I therefore ought to be thinking about equity with the company. However, I really need to pay my mortgage. And so maybe the advisor needs are very important. The other concept to think about is for founders is the cost of cash and the cost of equity. Equity is always expensive, relatively expensive. Equity means future cash at a better valuation. It means control of the company. It means the ability to hire, and it means dollars on exit, right? So equity is expensive. Especially when the company is doing well, equity is expensive. However, when a company is struggling or at the beginning when the equity isn't worth very much, it's all it has, equity is cheap. So this is a way that I think companies, startups can think about how to compensate their advisors and where it should be, whether it's equity or cash. The other thing I'd like to suggest to advisors is, especially those who can invest or are interested in are also investors. If I look at what I want as an advisor and potentially investor, I don't particularly want to be paid my 0.1% for advising for a couple of years. What I'd really like to be able to say is, I'd like to say, look, I'm going to advise you and try to make your company better. You're at a $5 million valuation right now. And then in a year, I'll put in $100,000 at a $6 million valuation. What that is I'd like to say, I'm not going to make substantial money from my 0.1%. But if I can invest something when I have really worked to de-risk it, then it works for the company, it works for me. And that is a warrant. So I think we should think about discussing with companies whether we can get a warrant from them, a option to invest in the future. And if you work through the math of this a little bit, and I won't do that here, but I'll do that in the article, it works out. You basically, instead of having to, you basically double your money I won't go into it. It's much better math. So I suggest we think about that. Cost. What should advisors cost? From the perspective of an advisor, we create huge value with small effort, and we feel we should be able to capture a good bit of that value, right? It's value-based pricing. I gave you something, it's worth a lot. You managed to monetize it. I want to get that. Founders, and advisors, I'm here to, I would like to maybe give you the perspective that it's not about value. The high value is a characteristic not of the advisor, but of the startup. The high value from a small effort comes from the fact that the startup has found an area that is ripe for exploitation and prepared that area. We are able to be effective because the startup has found something where a small effort on our part can make a big difference. I don't think we can expect to monetize all of that. From the point of view of a startup, you'll always have a hurdle that you need to get over, something that's going to be really valuable that you need from somebody. It's always, if you pay full value for that, if you pay everything that's that's worth to you right now, you're never going to have anything left. There's always another hurdle. So for a startup, it has to be affordable. You have to find the cheapest way to fulfill that goal. and it has to be affordable. I might want Penn and Teller to come do magic for my kids, but they're going to say, like, I could get $1 million for a night in Vegas, and I'm not going to want to pay that. So I'm going to end up with some high school student doing second rate bad magic. Um, and that's just the case. If an advisor is too expensive, um, that's the way it is. I think I've used this convert cash to equity at the capitalization. I've used this before. Other advisors have said this is what they think about. I would normally charge this much. So I'm going to convert the hours of work into cash at that capitalization rate, or equity at that capitalization rate. It makes sense, sure, but if I can get Google to pay me $2,000 an hour for an hour, um, that doesn't mean I can get Google to pay me every hour for $2,000. If I could get Google to pay me $2,000 an hour for every hour, then I would just do that all day, every day, take my 4 million and invest in these companies 50K at a time so the realization for us advisors is, this startup is not Google. We have to be affordable to them. If we have much better opportunities, we should be doing that, right? So we've got to be honest with ourselves. Another thing, there was a category of respondents, quite a number, that consider themselves fractional hires. So I wanted to just sort of, for myself, I don't like fractional hires. I'm your fractional CTO. And I'll just suggest to you as founders and also as advisors, doing the best thing for the startups shouldn't outsource their core competencies. The other part of this, if it's core competency, you should have it in-house. It should be there long-term. Investors also pay for uncapped commitments. What does that mean? If I invest $100 in a company, I'm not buying 40 hours of a CEO's time or a founder's time. I'm buying all of their time. I'm buying them putting their families on the line. I'm buying 200% of their time, right? Whereas if a fractional person is a person who's selling their 40 hours a week, 10 hours at a time, right? And for a lot of fractional folks, they're also looking for, I think we sometimes see this as a way of, like, I can work for 4 companies, and then if one really hits, then I'll go work for them full time. Problem with that is what happens with the other 3 that we've been helping, right? They're left without this core competency. So I like this fractional thing, but the exceptional, I would say, is for real piecework. So it might be legal, CFO, accounting, HR, things that a startup doesn't really need full-time work for. For those, I think being a fractional something is definitely a good idea. And in that case, it might be like legal. It might be really a cash type business. Given the time, I'm going to skip the equity instruments. Basically, the thing that's really attractive is these restricted stock grants. The thing that's really most in practice, what's usually done is anything that's in the employee stock ownership program already, because they've done the legal work, right? And options, easy, low risk. There are a couple of other options that we should look at, like restricted stock grants, if they're available, because they're tax advantageous. I'll talk about that in the article. Vesting and cliffs. Vesting really here only really means however much equity you're getting, how long are you expected to work for that? So if you're getting 0.25%, you vest over 2 years. Usually it would imply monthly for advisors. It would be like 0.01% a month. The cliff, one of the things that came out of the survey, and thinking about this, a lot of advisor value can be front loaded. So if you've worked with an advisor already, you know what you're getting. They probably should not have a cliff. They're starting to provide value from day one. You don't have to test them. That's the only thing the cliff is about. And if you don't, maybe a minimal cliff to test whether they actually can do the things for you that they've said. Make it easy to move on. Advisor relationships should sometimes, from both sides, they're done when they're done, and they shouldn't be excessively sticky. Agreements, there are a couple out there, notably FAST and Cooley-Go, that you can fill in. FAST is common. It's used a lot. It's a little bit cookie cutter, and a lot of folks don't like them. I'm hoping that we can work on with a couple of advisors, we can work on a SkyDeck version that we'll be able to put out there. In coming with agreements, there should be deliverables, but again, I think that they should be a little bit general because you never usually the kinds of think a little bit the way that boards of directors contribute. Sometimes it's across the board in areas that I don't identify quickly initially. So final thoughts here, align the incentives and the compensation between the advisors and the companies, focus on teaching to fish, high impact, strategic, cost-effective contribution. Be intentional about what you want to get out of it or with regard to equity and cash and what your needs are. I don't think that advisors should be used for core competencies, and recognize advisors are not staff or contractors or investors. Keep your investing and your advising separate in your mind, at least with respect to the goals. Again, guidelines, your mileage may vary. And I wanted to, as this is the best looking presentation that I've ever made, I wanted to thank Will Burke, who helped me to do that. So with that, this is the Substack if you want to sign up to see the article at some point. And I think we have a few minutes for questions.